Probably the most notable event in 1986, certainly for fans of Southern steam, was the first working of mainline steam on the southern region since the end of steam in 1967, except for one trip by Clan Line and one by David Shepherd's 9F. During October, Clan Line, Bert and Agnes Hall and Sir Nigel Gresley worked for 4 weekends between Salisbury and Yeovil, and we've a major feature on this later in our programme. Change is coming to the southern region main line from Waterloo to Bournemouth and Weymouth. Since 1967, the standard train formation has been a 4-rep, powered set, and 1 or 2 40Cs, as seen here at Southampton on a down semi-fast during work on Southampton Tunnel, requiring single-line operation. It's now intended to work the East Coast Main Line on the push-pull principle, but this has been in use on the Bournemouth line for over 20 years, at a line speed of 90, frequently actually exceeding 100. Scenes such as this at Bournemouth would become history as the Bournemouth to Weymouth line is electrified. The push-pull system, with a powered set 4-rep pushing 1 or 2 unpowered sets, 40Cs, from Waterloo to Bournemouth, was devised when Waterloo to Bournemouth workings were electrified in the mid-60s. Insufficient finance was then available to electrify on to Weymouth. This was just after Beeching, but it was considered necessary to maintain through workings. A number of the SR's indigenous Class 33s were converted for push-pull operation and have been used to haul the unpowered TCs to Weymouth and to push them back to Bournemouth. TCs were converted from loco-hauled stock, and one of these vehicles is the oldest passenger-carrying vehicle on BR from the first Mark I build in 1951. Trains are split without inconvenience to passengers, the time allowed for this remaining constant at 6 minutes since 1967. ECs have also been used on non-electrified lines to Salisbury and Portsmouth on a regular basis, and the flexibility of the system was well illustrated when push-pull fitted 09 shunters were used at Salisbury to operate the Laverstock Looper special trains during the Southern Steam weekends in October. From Hamworthy to Dorchester, the line traverses open countryside, and near to Moreton passes the Atomic Energy Research Establishment at Winfrith. Trains pass here as the section from Moreton to Dorchester has been singled in advance of electrification. Dorchester Station is undergoing a rebuild in association with the local brewers. For many years the station was an oddity as up trains ran past it before reversing into the up platform. This had been constructed in preparation for an extension to Exeter which never materialised. A connection to the Great Western Line at Dorchester Junction was built on a severe curve, and the new station is being built on this line. Another rebuilt station is at Weymouth, the terminus of the line. This was a very long drawn-out affair. The platform now remaining was the first part of the rebuilding in the early 50s. After many years of no progress, completion came in 1986, resulting in a much pared-down station with only 2 platform faces. Weymouth retains semaphore signalling, the only place on the line, other than 2 signals at Wareham. 233s on 140C are rare, particularly when pushing. This issue is something a little different. In 1986, BR introduced intercity trains across London, working via Kensington Olympia. We joined the 1345 Dover Western Docks to Liverpool train to cover both the South Eastern Main Line and the West London route via Olympia. We were fortunate to have driver John Hilton, whose interest in the South Eastern extends to writing its history. He was thus able to describe the route to us in detail.
Fascinating to all people who watch this.
Yeah, well, that's Shakespeare Tunnel, which we're coming up to. So it's got single bores,
Yes.
which is rather rare.
On the outskirts of Folkestone is the junction with the harbour branch, famous in steam days for the sight of up to 4 R1 tanks labouring up the steep gradient from the harbour with boat trains.
This is quite a modern station.
It's quite new actually because prior to electrification it only had an up and down platform, the other two was just dead end bays.
Oh, yes.
There's only two through those through here. We used to start trains from here in the mornings
Yes.
by empties coming up and backing back into the bay in the old days.
Jack, have you worked down this way all your working life then?
Yeah, I've just done 35 years.
It's pretty unusual to stay in the same area that long, isn't it, these days?
Well, one does look for a change now and then.
Yes. Which depot do you work out of then?
River Green.
What, have you been working for yourself for some time, or was it just a favourite project?
No, you don't go to the park now. There's the Elon Valley. Valley on went off on the right.
Oh, yes. That's the old junction then.
That's right. Very good junction. Where the line used to run to Hyde.
Oh,
There,
yes.
that one.
The Romney Hyde Dim Church wanted to come up this way once upon a time, didn't they?
I
It's a
don't know
sampling
what that
itself.
No, that's where it used to go there and back.
It's a nice little
Still
station,
there.
isn't it?
Nice here in the spring because we've got the gas up here. With the oxygen.
Yeah.
That lake, this is the old place, the great what's the name of the lake called?
Oh, this was another station. This was the race course station here. That's interesting. Two platforms so close to each other.
Yeah. So you could put a train over there.
Fireless engine or something.
I don't know. I know Louis 77 and I paid when.
There was quite a set too, wasn't there, about it? They also had the double deckers there, I think.
That's right. Well, that's over there.
That's still there, is it?
Well, I don't know about that, but the old loco, the old loco. That's the old loco.
That's still there, yeah.
That's back there.
Oh, yes. So I can't get the camera around to it, unfortunately.
This is the old work.
That's a good place to see so much of the old loco still standing.
This big shop here immediately on the left is the old steam engine erecting shop that is.
Yes.
Ashford was the engineering centre for the southeastern and is an important junction, with lines to Hastings via Rye, Ramsgate via Canterbury and to Maidstone.
That's used still as
Train maintenance depot.
crane maintenance. This is the Rye and Hastings route.
Over the
coming
back.
up behind us. Oh, one of the green ones.
Lovely. When will they let one of those go? Yeah.
So Daniel
That-
Gooch.
that one the other day. Yeah, the Hastings line up back in between the works and those carriage sidings over there.
Between Ashford and Tunbridge is the longest dead straight section of line in the UK. The only bend is at Headcorn, where the up lines were slewed in order to provide loops, the original formation having been straight. Headcorn was originally the junction with the Kent and East Sussex Railway, which ran to the south from here.
That is the old August line,
Oh, I see.
which is now just a side.
There used to be sidings up there for...
No, they made that side in there. It's probably cut off here now,
Yes.
but that was the old single line down to Hawkhurst.
Nice footbridge.
Yeah, that's quite a new one, that one.
Paddock Wood was once the junction for the Hawkhurst branch, but now is only a junction for a further route to Maidstone. The plethora of lines in Kent gave great flexibility for boat train workings in the heyday of steam, where timings were subject to the vagaries of shipping and the weather.
With some Hastings units
Yeah.
stored.
Yeah, well, waiting to go away, I think.
Yes. Have they taken any away yet?
Yeah, quite a number have gone, yeah.
Oh. Did they run them up under their... All of them.
All of them away.
Where are they going? Up to Norfolk or something?
Yeah. The only place they can deal with them, apparently.
To get rid of the blue asbestos?
That's right, yeah. They've gone through ovens or something, don't they? They tell me.
Or just burn the whole thing?
Burn the whole thing, and then what comes out the other end is black metal.
Yes. Now we can still see a few Hastings units left here.
The recent electrification of the Hastings route has resulted in the Hastings DEMUs being dumped at all available locations alongside the line.
They're on the railway building.
Yes.
Additionally, over the back though. See
Yes.
them top windows?
Oh, I see. Yes.
That's the site of Tunbridge Loco, that one. Steam loco there.
Yes. That was a major steam depot then, wasn't it?
Well, it was quite a busy place. It used to run through to Brighton now. There's the Hastings line, that's right now.
Yes. Now all electric.
At Bromley South, we changed drivers and had an opportunity to clean the windows.
Goes, I think it's 1850, like back to Railscene tonight.
Ah,
And he works at Brighton.
strange it doesn't stay at Wilston at the end of the day. Right,
Just the same at night.
yeah, that was true enough.
Yeah, you got to on these, haven't you? They've got double batch on them.
There's this single manning from here onwards.
You've
got to make sure that.
In line the loop. Oh, we go loop. Cancer of both lungs. Oh, in Arctic Metro, he just died with that. That goes down onto the Mid-Kent line down there.
Mid-Kent line?
Yeah.
No.
Right at the top of it, isn't
Got
it?
a single relief line here.
No, it is single now. It goes up to Crystal Palace.
Oh yes.
Central
Oh yes.
side, yeah. It was a double line a couple of years ago. There's the Mid-Kent down under there. The Sander Hayes and then splits Elmer's End, Bradishcombe.
Does it come back and join us?
No, they tell me that. Sorry?
Does it come back and join this line or not?
No. No, you only get up round that way, doesn't come back. Goes up round to Crystal Palace.
Oh, we've got all four tracks again here. But that
No,
one
they're only loops.
Oh, I see. That's why that one's so
Yeah,
rusty.
it goes from the other end, goes round to Alton. Back and right. That's the right, that's the one. South London, that is. Back and right, all that. All join up there.
Had an overrun with this job, didn't they? Up here.
Yeah, all went wrong, didn't it?
I was up here yesterday.
What you think?
Well,
Where does the line go to the right?
Holborn. Comes out Loughborough
Oh,
Junction.
Loughborough Junction, Blackfriars.
Loughborough Junction, Blackfriars, Holborn. And yeah, they put that motorway bridge in, they do, yeah. About three of them, isn't there? Did they really?
Brixton Station has 3 permanent passengers, supplied by the local authority.
You see, that's where you come out, you come up the Capitol Loop.
Yes.
The only trouble with that, there's no road access.
No, you can't
That's
get
the only thing wrong with it.
right away through the station to get to it, I suppose. That one's being done up, that old place.
Yeah, it's a shop, isn't it?
Is it a shop under there?
Yeah.
At Factory Junction, we turned off the main line to pass Stewart's Lane depot before running under the Brighton line at Clapham.
No, we always run specials through.
Oh, so it's always been to passenger standards.
Yeah. Yeah, we run specials through. Even in the steam days, used to relieve them here, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right.
Wait here to relieve
Factory
them.
Junction.
Factory Junction, yeah. So it's all controlled from Victoria Signal Box now. That's where you go down into Stewart's Lane. From there. That's the Stewart's Lane maintenance shed. You see engine in there now. And all the carriage sidings over this side under the bridge. Carriage shed.
When you're on the doorstep.
Well, yeah.
Years ago, you lived at Beaksport, didn't you?
Snow down.
Snowdown, yeah. Beaksport.
No, snow down. Brewery in Beaksport.
Oh, yeah.
There's a Gatwick coming over the top now. That's the bit that goes to Clapham Junction, 15 mile an hour permanent speed limit. Somebody did tell me the proper name of it, so we always know it's a Chelsea.
It's Battersea Bridge. That's the proper name.
That's it, Battersea Bridge. Pigeon ship bridge, you told me.
Yeah, it is too.
Yeah. On the BBC, I believe.
Yeah, it did.
Here comes a good old Southern engine.
If you ever got in one of these sidings, you was there forever, wasn't you?
This is the
That's the,
LT's
yeah, it's their underground ballast depot now, isn't it? It's their locos there.
their battery locos.
Yeah.
Station Olympia is the main London station for the cross-London services. This used to be the starting point for certain Great Western holiday expresses, and in later years was the motor rail terminus, although that function has now ceased.
Do all sorts of runs with it.
I imagine they need to test their brakes pretty frequently.
Yeah, they test all new brake blocks and all sorts of things.
The bloke stating, you know,
They did, but the other blokes did. All they give them to stick, don't they?
rather nice that actually, isn't it? In other respects, VR has always been very good on.
Yeah, they're supposed to be one of the best, aren't they?
Yes. Well, certainly in a lot of disciplines on VR, there are women. We're back to line restrictions.
Yeah. That's where you go down to North
I see, yes.
Then I'll go. Only one signal round, then I'll go. Would you come on motor or do we go down to Wilton? Sometimes we change it.
After crossing the GW main line near Old Oak Common, we pass another cross-London train bound for Brighton.
Yes.
That's probably why we go round to the next one.
Yeah, because
Things
of
are at the
the
same
time.
time, I suppose.
That's for Brighton down, isn't it?
Yeah. Seen the other logo.
Oh, I was going to say, where is he today? Hunters are going with a load these days, aren't they?
The end of our journey was alongside the West Coast Main Line, where an AC Electric waited to take the train forward to Liverpool.
No, only got engines in here, basically. But they ain't got much wire.
Take over London School of Economics. 87421. That really does look like the end of the line, doesn't it?
BR today is intended to be a modern archive to illustrate features of today's railways, not necessarily just locomotives, which may be subject to substantial change, or merely to show features of workings around the country. These Class 37s are working Hunterston to Ravenscraig ore trains on the ScotRail line from Glasgow to Ayr and Stranraer. The Stranraer route starts as a busy commuter line which has recently been electrified from Glasgow to Ayr. It was originally built by the Glasgow and South Western Railway, invariably known as the Sou-West, and served the rich industrial and agricultural lands of Renfrewshire and Ayrshire. The non-electrified single line south from Ayr is the main subject of this feature. Normal motive power on passenger workings are Class 47s, with 5 coaches on Stranraer to Glasgow trains. Girvan is a substantial coastal town and harbour. DMUs supplement the mainline trains as far as here from Ayr, and the buildings are an example of post-war construction, replacements for the original wooden buildings which burnt down. Reached by this splendid bridge, the goods yard is still partially intact. although it appears to be out of use and a candidate for lifting. Girvan is at the foot of a bank in each direction, which still causes difficulties for trains, that to the south especially so. This leads to the first passing loop at Penweri, which was formerly a station. Local hopes of a reopening are low due to excessive costs. Bar Hill is the only intermediate station remaining between Girvan and Stranraer, and despite its southwest origins, boasts this two-faced clock. Key token workings control the line, the tyres instruments at Bar Hill being housed in the station offices, whilst the signalling is controlled from a miniature signal box. The up platform is wooden, as is the shelter, and this is likely to be replaced by a modern building in the near future. Superb lattice post signals remain on the line, and there are two regular speedlink workings each way daily. Here the early morning train was running 4 hours late due to the locomotive having insufficient traction on Girvan Bank, leaving 2 wagons behind for collection by the next train. High on the moorlands, Glenwilly was once a station, but is now a lonely crossing place. The platforms and various other structures remain, but are due for demolition shortly. Distance signals still reign, although in other parts of the country they've been replaced by painted boards. This is the morning down train from Glasgow accelerating away after exchanging tokens. 2 5-coach sets are in use for these internal trains. The former Sea-Link liveried sets are no longer used on these services. Final crossing loop is at Dunragit, some 7 miles short of Stranraer. This was also a station at one time, the platforms remaining, but out of use. An up freight is headed by one of Scotland's indigenous Class 26s, now allocated to the rail freight sector. The goods yard at Stranraer is at the closed Stranraer Town Station, the buildings of which remain. The platform line is still in use for run-round purposes, the line formerly running from here to Port Patrick. Freight traffic keeps the yard full, most of the traffic originating with one customer, a trader in the town. An 08 yard pilot is maintained and coaching stock is serviced in the yard between duties. The yard is in two parts, a container crane being situated on a kickback road from the platform run-rounds outside a modern storage shed. Car traffic for Northern Ireland is substantial. Car ticks are worked in on speed links and then tripped to the harbour station, past the former engine sheds and repair workshops. Stranraer Station is the former harbour station, built on a pier alongside the Sealing Terminal. Two daily trains run to and from Euston, connecting with sailings, one at night, known as the Paddy, carrying sleeping cars, and this, the 11:25 up. The Sealing connection remains a major source of traffic for the Stranraer route, cooperation extending to the holding of trains and ships for connecting purposes. The box at Stranraer Station controls the goods yard as well as the station by releasing a token which controls the yard entry. Stranraer is the closest port to Northern Ireland, as a result of which security precautions are heavy, and we were quizzed as to our motives when filming these sequences. The Stranraer route appears to have a secure future. It's expected that sprinters will replace loco-haul trains in the near future, but radio signalling is unlikely for a while for financial reasons and because of the difficult terrain. There's a growing interest in departmental matters, evidenced by the attention given in the printed press. This feature is by way of an experiment, and we'd appreciate viewers' comments as to whether further features should appear, and if so, in greater depth, and or for longer or shorter. Track machines are creatures of the night or weekend, but these placids were being refueled at Abergavenny during the first week of November. BR has a large fleet of track maintenance vehicles, the European company of Placers being the principal suppliers.
well, just I'll see that up another form, yeah. Got me back, have you? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Many pre-grouping and grouping vehicles remain in use in the departmental fleet, these ex-Southern vans being amongst the last of their kind still in service. The research department at Derby is well known for its large fleet of ex-service stock, and it's recently adopted a new livery for these, which looks very strange on old stock. Engineers use large number of hopper wagons, which bear coded names of strange sea creatures, such as catfish, sea cow, sea lion, and so on. This train was being shunted at Bescot on the 17th of September, 1986. Weymouth Quay is a fascinating line, with regular daily boat trains until the sudden withdrawal of sealing from the port in September 1986. The line must now be in doubt, but we were privileged to ride in the cab of 33119 over the line earlier in 1986.
Traffic doesn't help, does it? They got special shutters here once.
The old jury shunter used to go, and they had a 350 at one time.
Yes.
The juries were alright, you know, you had the bell, were a good view.
As the line runs along the streets of Weymouth, it's necessary for flagmen to walk in front, clearing cars out of the way.
This lot's completely in the way. What happens if someone's parked on the track, gone away?
Well, the police, the
At the quayside, another 33 with 4TC awaited return to the main line. In the past, dedicated Channel Island boat trains ran direct to the quayside, but in the past few years, as traffic declined, many boat trains with 33TC combinations, which had worked normal service trains into Weymouth Station first. Salisbury Station, base for Southern Steam operations, has recently been renovated. The booking hall is both modern and traditional at once, as the signs and paint schemes are in London and Southwestern style. No longer used for passenger trains, Platform 5 became the steam locomotive stabling point. Here the 3 engines in use were watered and fed. Key to steam operations was the recent reinstatement of a loop at Laverstock. The hall is seen reversing over the new track, on a formation originally lifted in the last century. It then returned to the station over the Waterloo main line. All locomotives in use were appropriate to the area. Halls regularly ran to Salisbury on the western route from Bristol and Westbury. Bert and Agnes Hall was a last-minute substitute for Southern N15 Sir Lamiel, out of action due to a cracked frame and sorely missed by Southern enthusiasts. 2 A4s worked over the route during the 1948 locomotive exchanges. Due to the success of the steam operations, it was necessary to run a 4-weekend programme instead of the planned 3 weekends, and 4498 was booked for the additional runs. Most relevant locomotive was the bullet rebuild Clan line, which brought back happy memories of the Ace, and seen here climbing past the site of Salisbury MPD. First station out these days, Tisbury still looks the part of a southern country station. A new loop just outside the station allowed sufficient paths for steam workings. Gerald Daniels was the man responsible for Southern Steam. At Gillingham he photographed the A4 alongside the Crompton diesel, which acted as standby but was never needed. From Gillingham, the line climbs to Buckhorn Western. The Gresley Pacific is seen on its first public working halfway up to the tunnel. The summit is just east of the tunnel. Always a favourite location in steam days, it's still attractive, even with the single track wished upon the line by the Western region in the 60s. Sporting the traditional headcode discs for Waterloo-Exeter trains, the Southern Pacific breasts the summit. Clan Line appropriately made the first steam clearance run on the Thursday before the public runs. Templecombe was a photo stop on that run and was also to feature on afternoon trips. The station, recently reopened, is a pale shadow of the time when S&D trains made regular connections. Templecombe is situated halfway up a 1 in 100 climb from Blackmore Vale. The Bullet Pacific is seen topping the climb after a Templecombe photo stop. It's not always pure sunshine in the south. On a misty day, the Didcot-based hall commences the eastbound climb from Sherborne, a long double line, which is bidirectionally signalled on the up road. Yeovil Junction retains much of its old atmosphere. The former Down Island platform and buildings are retained for use by the engineers. The former Down Through Road remains for run-round purposes, and all steam trains used the platform. This allowed normal service trains to use the former Up platform, as usual, without interference. The greatest benefit conferred by the engineers at Yeovil is the retention of the turntable. This has a 70-foot deck and is suitable for the largest BR steam engines. It's been retained in full working order, although it probably saw more use in October than for many a year. The turntable was retained for turning ballast tamping machines. some of its runs, Clam Line sported red nameplates and for others black. Despite the absence of Salamion, the Merchant Navy recreated the great days of the West of England main line for all southern enthusiasts. Who knows what will happen in future? Yeovil is ideally placed as a terminus for other routes, such as Bristol or Swindon via Westbury, so maybe the modified Hall will be only the first Great Western engine to become part of Southern Steam. Once again, we're delighted to bring you Cam Camwell's film record of BR Steam in the 50s. On the 3rd of November 1956, Cam visited the Welshpool and Clamfair Railway for what was thought to be its last train. Little did the participants realise that the railway would still be with us in the 80s. At Easter that year, Cam visited the West Country. He filmed many of the western and southern branches, recording scenes that were to vanish completely within a decade. Barnstable had 3 stations, the Great Western at Victoria Road and South Western at both Junction and Barnstable Town. The southern featured M7s and Bullards, but by 1956 had introduced LMS and standard tanks on the line to Torrington and on the North Devon and Cornwall Junction line to Howrall Junction. Howrall was famous for infrequent bouts of intense activity, as it was the junction for 3 single lines. To the west was Bude, and to the south, Wadebridge. Wadebridge was also a junction, O2s mixing with Western Prairies, which ran to Bodmin Road on the Cornish Main Line, via Bodmin General, which was purely Great Western. The original Bodmin and Wadebridge terminus was at Bodmin North, served normally by O2s, which also operated the Callington branch, part of which, to Gunny's Lake, survives today. An unusual event on the 22nd of July 1956 was a stress test on the Severn Bridge. 2 castles were employed, and Cam enjoyed an unusual view. The bridge was closed in 1963 when a ship collided with it in fog and was dismantled in 1967. In November, Cam visited the northeast, recording scenes on the North Tyne branch and the impending closure of the Border Counties line, which straddled northern England and southern Scotland. At Easter 1957, Cam found shunting horses in action in North Wales. By contrast, even a Midland 4F looked like modern motive power. An LNWR tradition was maintained at Wolverton Carriage Works, where obsolescent saddle tanks still went about their duties as works shunters. In common with many visitors to the Severn Valley Railway, we commence our visit at the new southern terminus, Kidderminster Town. Built much in the style of Ross-on-Wye and Winchester Chesel, the main buildings are virtually complete and set the tone for the whole railway. Two locomotives visited the line for the 1986 Enthusiasts Weekend. The coal tank performing local train duties for the 2 days. The other visitor was Colliper from the Birmingham Railway Museum. The station is entirely lit by gas and has many period pieces to enhance its atmosphere. The building in the background is to become the Kidderminster Railway Museum, which is a project independent of the SVR. The foundations of the new signal box at Kidderminster have been laid, and the goods shed in the background is to become the carriage workshop. Highlight of the weekend was the simultaneous appearance of the 2 red Jubilees, which were lined up in the afternoon sunshine for the photographers. LMS flavour was maintained by a double-headed express, seen climbing Bewdley Bank behind Class 2 and Class 4 moguls. At Bewdley itself, the first train of the day was headed by the BR Standard Class 4, banked by the prototype Black 5, an arrangement used to ensure there was only one locomotive in the Kidderminster run-round spur at any time. One Bewdley loco was the modified hall, seen being prepared for duties. The other was the Churchwood heavy freight loco 2857. Bewdley North, the Ginty arrived in order to haul goods trains during the weekend. Signalman John Smith was on duty at Bewdley South, which has the usual superb view of a well-placed box. At Northwood Halt, the railway crosses a minor road at an ungated crossing. This is under approach control, trains being restricted to 5 miles an hour. Best known photographic point on the line, the Victoria Bridge, attracts many enthusiasts. The coal tank leaves Arley with a local train. The locomotive was due to return on the 18th of October 1986 to Dinting on its last mainline run before overhaul. Arley again won an award in the 1986 ARPS Best Kept Station competition. A reminder of a previous visitor is seen in the window. The station's always interesting on special weekends, and a goods train is seen after shunting into the yard to allow passenger trains to pass. As usual, the Great Western Severn Valley Limited set was immaculate, affording as much a glimpse of what preservation is all about as do locomotives. cover the northern part of the line in a subsequent issue. After its stint on the Severn Valley, the coal tank returned to Dinting on the main line. The opportunity was taken by the SLS to mark the 80th birthday of its former secretary, Cam Camwell, by running a special train and making a presentation at Chester Station. We feel sure that all our customers will share the sentiments expressed at the presentation and wish Cam many more happy years of railway enthusiasm.
Just one question. What's that icing made with spilt milk? All right, any more?
Just 1 second, please.
Any more?
To the locomotive crews at Eastleigh, the Didcot, Newbury and Southampton Railway was an alien line. Turn right at Shawford Junction, off the timetable onto the calendar, is what they often said. This is what this train is doing, turning right off the main Waterloo-Bournemouth line, heading for Winchester, Cheshull, Newbury and Didcot. The north-south Didcot, Newbury and Southampton Railway had a checkered past, its origins traceable back to the railway mania of 1840, but it was not until 1885 that the line eventually reached Winchester, and a few years later took the southerly course on towards Southampton. Unfortunately, it never reached Southampton on its own metals, and instead a single line ran from Winchester Cheshull alongside the Winchester bypass towards Shawford and Southampton. Today, the Winchester bypass is a road notorious for its accidents, but here, in this rare cine film taken in 1959, the road appears empty, alien from cars. At Winchester, there was a large goods yard just south of the station at Bar End, far busier than its southern counterpart at the main line. The single line passed the goods yard, which had commodious facilities for goods of all sorts, and skirted round the bottom of St Catherine's Hill before heading towards Southampton. Shunting was a common feature at Winchester, several turns of duty starting from Eastleigh, as well as irregular pickup goods which operated all the way between Winchester and Newbury. There was also a small locomotive shed and turntable within the yard, this providing the accommodation for the engines over the weekend, as well as the time engine changing took place at Winchester Cheshull. The station itself was situated in a cutting at the foot of St Giles's Hill, a legacy of the days when the DNS reached Winchester, and this was the only land they could afford. Unlike any of the other station buildings towards Newbury, Winchester Cheshull was a typical Great Western design, paralleling now Kidderminster, but also similar to those at Stourbridge Town and Ross-on-Wye. To control the layout at the station, a 27-lever signal box of mechanical type was provided from 1933 onwards. Entering the station from the south is a brand new BR Standard Class 4 on one of the tanker trains from Forley. These are a regular feature of traffic in the 1950s. Another regular visitor was City of Truro, based at Didcot and working a regular turn to Southampton, returning at 4:57 towards Didcot every weekday. The station is perhaps best remembered by its tunnel and the good vantage point for photographers from the footbridge. Unfortunately, all now gone, instead replaced by a car park. There were 8 intermediate stations between Winchester and Newbury. North from Winchester, Kingsworthy was the first, and from 1955 onwards provided only with a single platform. It was not one of the original stations, however, and had opened in 1909. the standard class 4s also working several passenger trains, including the excursion service shown here. Between Kingsworthy and Worthy Down, the line passed underneath the main southern route at Winchester Junction, the same point of divergence for the Winchester-Alton line, better known now as the preserved Mid-Hants. There was no physical connection between the two routes until 1942, when a spur was put in linking the southern and Great Western routes. Unfortunately, that had a bit of a short life. The demolition contractors moved in November 1966, reducing Worthy Down to a shell compared with how it had been just a few years before. Northwards towards Newbury, the next station was Sutton Scotney. Here it was known locally as the Sevenpenny Railway, as there were two signalmen, one called Jack Tanner and the other Ernie Penny. The station also serving the village of Barton Stacey, where there was a large army camp and consequently much traffic. Alongside the goods shed, the staff had trained a rose to entwine into the magic initials GWR, several people, including myself, now having a cutting of this in our gardens. Sutton Scotney was one of the passing places on the line towards Newbury, the whole route single track, but with passing loops at most of the intermediate stations. Northwards towards Whitchurch was a long section, some 5.5 miles, at one time in the 1940s broken by an intermediate signal box at Lodge Bridge, which no photographs have been found. The line was renowned also in the 1960s for its accidents, several spectacular incidents occurring, including two at Whitchurch, where locomotives of the same class ran through the sand drag you can see here and ended up down the bank on the left-hand side. The first of these was 76017 in 1954, the same engine now preserved on the Mid-Hants, and I'm told, if you know where to look, the marks of the accident are still visible. Recovery involved first of all digging the ground out underneath so as to bring the machine back onto an even keel, and then the following Sunday 2 steam cranes were brought in to lift the engine back onto the rails. Ironically, the same incident happened involving 76026 6 years later in 1960, and she is also shown here in basically the same position. All the station buildings between Newbury and Winchester, and likewise between Didcot and Newbury, were basically the same design, the DNS adopting a style more reminiscent of a country house rather than a wayside station. Moving on towards Newbury, next station up is Lichfield, not to be confused with Lichfield in the Midlands, although it is said on one occasion a passenger did get off asking where the so-and-so hotel was. Perhaps the most spectacular incident occurred in 1963, at the delightful sounding location of Wookie's Hole between Highclere and Berkeley. Here, a southbound mixed freight jumped the rails for reasons that were never fully established, causing absolute chaos in a cutting. From the engineer's point of view, this was the worst location for a possible accident, a single line with the track destroyed, and meaning that recovery had to involve a crane approaching from either end. The Eastleigh Motive Power Superintendent, Stephen Townrow, was fortunately on hand to record the event on film. Our final slide is of Compton between Newbury and Didcot, still with some of the buildings in GWR light and dark stone. Unfortunately, this is no longer still visible, for through freight services finally ceased in 1964.
The North Yorkshire Moors Railway held an autumn gala, principal feature of which was the return to steam of the Maunsell S15, number 841. Now running in unlined SR black, The return of the Southern Goods 460 made up for the sad non-appearance of its express counterpart, number 777 Salamiel, on the Salisbury to Yeovil workings. It's to be hoped that the two will meet in the near future if the S15 runs on the main line as expected. We were invited for an unusual view of the locomotive. Not a cab ride, but a tender ride. Most notable feature of preserved railway operation in 1986 was the number of visiting locomotives. As we've seen, the Coal Tank and Colloper visited the Severn Valley, and here we record the visit of the Great Western Society's Small Prairie to the West Somerset. Against the background of the sea, the tank looked perfect, and it was delightful to see her able to stretch her legs on the longest preserved line in Britain. The KESR also hosted a normally shed-bound Great Western tank, the pannier being loaned by Tyseley. It worked a mixed train in true Colonel Stevens tradition. Another tank on loan was 1466. Unfortunately, when we went to film it in North Wales, it was awaiting return to Didcot. Even so, we couldn't resist these shots of the home-based Ginty at work along the beautiful riverside Clan-Gothlan Railway. Most unusual visitor was the Festiniog's Alco tank to the Vale of Rydal for their Enthusiasts' Weekend. This was the first visiting locomotive since 1922 and is seen arriving at the top of the line on the last up train of the weekend. Summer 1986 saw the first signs of an improvement to Settle and Carlisle services, when a number of local stations were reopened on a permanent basis with a DMU service. Known as the Dalesman service, BR required an average of 25 passengers per train to make the service pay, and in the event the average was 100. Carlisle repainted a Class 108 DMU in original livery, which was used on many trains. In Scotland, the brightly liveried Mexican Bean DMU set was in use on the Oban line from Crean-Larrick for the second year running. Signalling at Crean-Larrick has recently been dismantled in preparation for radio signalling on the West Highland lines. In September 1986, the airline electrification project was brought into use, earlier than originally intended. Class 318 three-car units work from Glasgow to Ayr and are one-man operated. Electrification to Largs will be the final phase of the scheme, and extension of the wires to the terminus at Largs is expected by January next year. Only one line is being electrified, but the former up line remains for freight trains from Hunterston. As part of the Saltburn 125 celebrations to commemorate the 125th anniversary of the arrival of the railway at the North East Coast Resort, 2 pacers were run over the remains of the coastline to Whitby. Here they crossed the valley outside the town. The pacers were not permitted to run to the end of the line at Boulby, and the trip was terminated short of Loftus. Classes 58 and 31 have now joined the growing list of named BR locomotives. We were unable to locate a named 58 working, so include an unnamed example at Milton Mowbray, as the latter is a fascinating location. one Class 31 named is a rail freight machine and is seen leaving Bescot Yard. Also at Bescot, we recorded BREL's international train on a press launch hauled by Velocity. The train is a travelling showpiece based on the Mark III design but with deeper windows and plug doors. It's to be loaned to BR for working trials on Manchester Euston trains from December and remains the property of BREL. BREL's works at Eastleigh held an open day in October 1986, at which the star was the green-liveried Class 33, named after the depot. For the open day, the paint scheme was further modified to more resemble its original livery. Also repainted was the depot's non-capital stock Class 07, an ex-Southampton dock shunter. Principal activity at the works is the maintenance and overhaul of the region's EMU stock and classes 33 and 73 locomotives. 33s are now popular rail tour locomotives, and a pair of slimline 33-2s powered a rail tour to the Settle and Carlisle in November 1986. Class 33s no longer work the Welsh Borders line from Cardiff to Hereford, on which a new station opened at the beginning of the summer timetable. Class 47s now predominate. A new Parkway station was opened at Tiverton in the West Country, alongside the M5 motorway. Trains to Paddington and the north via Bristol provide the best service for North Devon passengers for many years. The new parkway spelt the end of Tiverton Junction, but the station remained substantially intact in October 1986. Main line steam continues to fascinate, and the Birmingham Railway Museum's Jubilee ran a number of trains from Southport to Manchester and Wigan before visiting the Severn Valley. The Settle and Carlisle has seen few steam trains in 1986, this run being the return trip for 44767 George Stephenson after working on the West Highland during the summer. At Keighley, the Black 5 was double-headed by the resident 4F, seen getting to grips with the notorious curving gradient out of the station. The locomotive remained on the line for a few weeks thereafter. The ex-S&D 7F made one of its rare sorties on the main line, which was to be the last before its now due overhaul. The locomotive took over the train at Sheffield and ran to Carnforth and back to Leeds. It had been booked to work back to Sheffield, but due to late running, was taken off at Leeds. No, not more wood sidings. The West Yorkshire countryside looks very similar to the Mendips, and the 7F looked thoroughly at home. Dramatic lighting emphasises the 7F's power as she heads back towards Leeds in the evening sunshine. The Pennine Limited was a success, despite our comments in Railscene 8. City of Wells shared duties with the Hull-based Black 5 number 5305, but the weather could be very murky at times. The West Country slipped violently at speed in Burkitt Tunnel and bent a coupling rod, a fate which befell a number of her sisters in BR days. The Northeastern was a double header over the Essex Sea and the Newcastle and Carlisle. The K1 2005 and Black 5 5305 took the train over the single line stretch at Ribblehead before a photo stop at Garsdale, as seen in Rough Cuts Volume 1. Down south, Mallard reached Marylebone. On Sunday, the 12th of October 1986, 3 Gresley Pacifics were run from the terminus, and our final shots are of Sir Nigel Gresley and Mallard both having some difficulty in restarting from High Wycombe. Flying Scotsman was to follow, light engine, later in the day.